Welcome to the Booktopia podcast. I'm Ben Hunter, Booktopia's fiction category manager, and this is a podcast about books and the brilliant people who read them and write them. I'm joined today with my friend and colleague, Shanu Prasad. Hi, Shanu.
Hello.
And our guest is Admire. It is Jacqueline Maley. She is an award-winning journalist and columnist with the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Together with Kate McClymont, she won the prestigious Walkley Award for Excellence in Journalism alongside a spate of other awards. She lives in Sydney and her first novel is called The Truth About Her. Jacqueline, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We all love this book. A lot of us in the office have read it, and we are sure that it's going to be a huge success. I really wanted to start. I'm really curious because we know a lot of journalists then turn to writing fiction. A lot of it's crime fiction. This is not that. But you've had such a successful career as a journalist. Have you always wanted to write fiction as well, or is this something that's come upon you more recently? Tell us about that journey.
No, I think I absolutely always wanted to write fiction, and I always have been writing creatively in my copious amounts of spare time. I think in a way I actually became a journalist because it was a legitimate way to earn a living writing, and I just always loved to write. Yep. And I wanted obviously to write, even like I love my journalism, but I also wanted to write creatively. So I did that sort of quietly for quite a long time before I got serious and also, really put aside the time to do the book. And this is the result. But yeah, no, it was always something like I'm sort of actually, my dirty secret is that I don't read as much. I almost read no non-fiction. I often don't read the political books that I should. I'm just always got my head in a book. I've always got my head in a novel. I love fiction, always have.
Great.
Well, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to do something that I don't usually do this on the podcast, but I knew I was onto something very special when we got these proof copies, these early editions of the book, and the first two sentences of your novel are printed on the back of the book, and they just gave me a flavour for what was the excellent story to come. Would you read these two sentences for me?
Oh gosh, sure. I thought it was going to be a physical challenge, but this I can do. Okay. The summer after I wrote the story that killed Tracy Doran, I weighed 65 kilos and had just stopped sleeping with two very different men, following involvement in what some people on the internet called a sex scandal, although when it was described that way, it didn't seem like the kind of thing that happened to me. It seemed like something that happened to the kind of people that I wrote about, who were a different sort of people altogether.
See, I love that. It frames from the first moment that this is a journey of self-understanding for this character, Susie Hamilton, and it's a wild ride.
It is.
How did you craft it? Explain it to us. Tell us your secrets.
It's interesting. I think that actually those first sentences in the first page was very much a part of my journalistic craft, because we have it drummed into us as journalists when we're training that you have to, the pyramid structure, people often don't read to the end of the story. You have to fight for your readers' attention all the time, and I've always felt it's our duty not to just inform our readers but also to entertain them and to hold their interest. So I was like, you have to have a banging beginning. It's like the lead par of a story. It just has to be really good and draw people in. So, but I actually wrote the beginning, that exact beginning, after I'd written most of the book. I went back and I recrafted the beginning a little bit because I had a better idea of what the book was about and where it was going to go. And it's funny, I'm sure everybody's different, but I knew what the end scene would look like, but I wasn't so sure about my beginning, so I went back and redid that a little bit. But yeah, I'm glad that it grabbed you. I mean, that's really what I wanted. Yeah. Yeah, and I wanted the voice to be very strong. It's always a choice when you're writing, right? Like, do you write in the third person or the first person? They're usually the choices that people make. And I experimented a bit with writing in the third person, but I found that I could not get Susie's voice really right and really strong until I was writing in the first, and then it just sort of flowed. And like Anne Enright is a writer that I just admire so much, and she pretty much only writes in the first because she's like, I just need to do that to get the character's voice right.
And was there something else things that you found surprising about writing a fiction book versus, writing sort of news articles. Obviously, you talk about being able to bring some of that the knowledge of a structure and getting people in right at the beginning. But was there something that you weren't expecting that you came across?
Yeah, there were lots of things. I had to really deprogram a lot from journalistic writing. I found I was a bit inhibited when I was first really writing this, and then I just had to really remind myself, and I did a lot of reading actually of books that I find are particularly wild and uninhibited in their style, because I was like, you don't have to, like, you can experiment with form if you want. You don't have to stick to the facts. You can make up whatever you want. And I had to deprogram. So that was one thing. I found that I was able to turn out a fair bit of prose because you're used to doing that. So I was very, very businesslike about, right, you've got to get 2,000 words done today. I didn't sort of wait for the muse to land upon my shoulder or whatever. But actually my publisher, Catherine Milne, was like, because I was like, I'm not exactly sure like what's going to happen with this character and how I'll resolve this. And she was like, the characters will tell you what they'll show you. And I was like, oh, that sounds a bit like, woo-woo sort of thing. Yeah. But she was right. Like, if you develop your characters and know them quite well and you put them in situations, then they'll sort of tell you what's going to happen, and how they respond in that situation ends up being the resolution. So that organicness and that's sort of, that's the sort of magic of fiction, I think, is it's an alchemy that you can't plan for a lot of what goes on, or I didn't anyway. Yeah.
It really does come across in the work, though. I feel like every character that you have has an arc and an ending to their story that really does work. None of it was jarring. Sometimes you might read something and you're just like, oh, that doesn't seem like that person would do that. But I think that was one of the things that I thought was so brilliant in the book, is that everyone felt like real people that you could have come across, and they did things that you would expect those kinds of people to do. And there were some unexpected things that I won't spoil, because there's some things that could spoil things in the book, and I won't, that happen, which is also true about people. So I really appreciate that you did that in the book.
Thank you.
Yeah, and when I'm on that, that vibe of the journalist turned author thing, something I really enjoy, and it shines in this book, is when you're a journalist, I think you rarely get to introduce a lot of colour to your reporting. And so when you get to grasp a detail and squeeze it in, you make sure it's really precious. And with each of those characters, whether it's the floral tops or some aspect of a musician in a bar, it's, they're glorious pops of colour.
I think, thank you. Yeah, I think there's something about the economy of journalism, which I that's the kind of writing that I like to read. Not stuff that's not too expansive and not too florid, but is quite economical in its style. And I wanted to do that, but also, just wanted to do these little brushstrokes that explained a character. And I think if you've been a working journalist for a while, whether or not you even mean to, you just become you're in an observational mode all the time. You're always looking at people, taking down notes about people, which is like a really creepy way to live, by the way, now that I say it out loud. But maybe it's, has a positive purpose in the end, yeah.
While we're on this journalism thing, so the character Susie Hamilton is an investigative journalist. You're an investigative journalist. We talk a lot about how journalism as a part of our society or whatever is under stress from economic changes or political forces, cultural just changes, mindsets, kind of anti-truth, anti-journalism stuff. And there's what's happening in the courts now with Christian Porter, and that's scary. Through your character, Susie Hamilton, you look into the imperfect world of a journalist. What do we outsiders get wrong when we make assumptions about journalism?
Gosh, it's hard because I think people don't like to hear journalists complaining, and I understand that because I think the media, disgraces itself a lot in various ways. What do people from the outside don't see? Probably social media is a wonderful democratising force in many ways, but it does mean as a journalist, and I suppose anyone who produces something a lot, like, we have to churn out stuff daily, it means that you just have all of these armchair critics. So it's a weird job in that way because, you know, if you're an accountant or you're an engineer or, I don't know, you're a doctor, like people who contribute much more usefully to society, I might add, in the most part, you don't have someone going, oh, I didn't really like, you know, the pen stroke you did there, and have you thought about doing that this way? Or like, I'm just going to abuse you, you know, for this calculation that you got wrong or whatever. So yeah, like that is quite intense. And like, I think if you're one person who's like, oh, Jacqueline Maley, why did you write that piece of crap you wrote last weekend? And they tweet at you. It's like, they're just one person doing it. But if that's your timeline and there's like 50,000 people doing that too, it's really intense. I don't get too much of that stuff, but I get a lot of emails, some of them from readers, like a lot of them actually from readers that I love, that are beautiful, and you have this personal connection with your reader. That's really cool. But you also get a lot of people telling you what you're doing wrong. And like, I don't mind, like that's fine. I don't need people to agree with me either. But if that veers onto abuse, it can weigh you down. Yeah.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
I just wanted to also just touch on the in the book when Susie's career does not go as she hopes. What was, you know, how was it writing that as a person who is still a working journalist, and then writing about someone's sort of career implosion, but then being able to sort of go through her journey? Did you what was the inspiration behind kind of making that her path?
I was really interested in the idea of shame and disgrace, and I just knew when I had the idea for Susie in the book, I knew that something shameful and disgraceful had happened to her, and she'd had a big rupture and she'd had to rebuild from that. And I think it's just a really interesting, vulnerable spot to put your character in, to put your main character in. But I almost had to detach a little bit from her because I was putting her through all of this stuff, and I did identify with her in some way, and I just had to keep reminding myself that, you know, I could do all these things to her and I wasn't hurting her. She wasn't real. Does that sound ridiculous? I don't know. But yeah, I was really interested in that idea. I was really interested in redemption. I was really interested in how you make amends to people that you've harmed, and I needed her to go through all of that in order to explore those themes.
Yeah, and certainly as well the relationships and the different sorts of relationships her colleagues, relationships she has with her different colleagues in the different jobs she ends up going through in this book, but also the relationship that she has with her daughter, which is another really beautiful, just a beautiful relationship, and that child seems like a delight, I have to say. Did you enjoy writing those sort of new connections, or those sort of deeper connections that she was getting to have throughout the book?
Yeah, I mean, the mother-daughter relationship between Susie and her daughter Maddie is central to the novel, obviously, and I think that softens Susie a lot because she does do things that are not so great and not so likeable and make her a bit difficult. And I was mothering, I had a very small child at that point, and that is very much taken from, that part of the book is very much taken from my life, not the rest of it, I hasten to add.
Very clear to say that.
Yeah. But I freighted, I put a lot of my feelings and thoughts and sort of frustrations and love of motherhood all into the book, and I wanted to do that. And I just had always thought, this is such an intensely emotional experience. It's one of the big experiences in life, and it's not treated very seriously in literature when you look at literature over the long term. So why not? Why is it that we have books about war and we have family sagas written by men, but we don't have something about this incredibly intense relationship that a mother has with her child in the first early years? I wanted to write about that, and I also wanted to write about how funny it is. It's mental spending time with a small child, and they say funny things all the time, and they're really loose, and they're totally socially uninhibited. And it's sort of like being, like I've said before, it's sort of like being with a really loose drunk person sometimes, And I was like, this is funny. People should write about this more. So I did. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I wanted that to be really central. And then there's the other mother-daughter relationship in the book, which almost mirrors it because it's very much at the other end of the spectrum in terms of closeness, and there's a purity to relationship with a small child, and there's a real complexity to a relationship with an with an adult child. So I wanted that to come out in a few different relationships that are depicted in the book. Yeah.
You also get into the process of grieving in this book, the death of a child, and the very nonsensical ways in which we do that. Was your career past like, was that a influence on how you structured that relationship and how that played out with that character?
With the death? Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm lucky. I've never really experienced a lot of death in my own life so far, but I have seen it, I suppose, in my job. You see it, you deal with it, you write about it, and so you're forced to contemplate it, I suppose, in a way, and you see the different ways that people react to it, and for some people it makes them very angry. And I think that's something that I thought would be interesting to write about. And to me, the anger that Jan feels is very normal. It's a very usual reaction, and I just sort of wanted to depict that in all of its sort of mess and to not shy away from it. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, but while we're on the motherhood thing, something I really enjoyed in this book is that you look at the stress of motherhood in terms of economics.
Yeah.
Susie is a single mum, and she lives in Sydney, and she has a non-permanent place. She doesn't know whether she's going to be able to keep the home she's in because of changes to her career, abrupt changes to her career. And she compares herself with what she calls the park mums, who are more economically comfortable than her and are able to put green things in their children's food without issue. And it's for that mere reason they somehow become morally superior to her. I loved exploring that. I don't have a question for that. I just really want to compliment that.
Well, I think that's a very Sydney thing. You know, like, we're obsessed with property in Sydney, and we talk about it constantly, and it is a huge social marker, and it becomes a de facto measure of success, I think, and not just economic success, but, as you say, some sort of moral success. Like, I've done a good job here, and I mean, I was a single parent when my child was littler, and I struggled with all of that sort of stuff. And at a really fundamental level, you're like, well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do for my child what my parents did for me. You know, they gave, and I think this is generational. We see it a lot in people who don't, a younger generation of people who can't get into the housing market. Their parents were able to provide them with a stable home, which was a much smaller proportion of their income. They could probably even do it on one salary. And, the generation now is struggling to do that for their children on two salaries, sometimes quite good professional salaries or whatever. So it's a bit of a generational crisis. And also I was all right, but I was a member of like a Facebook single mothers group, and it's a different slice of life. Like, it is, a lot of economic security, housing insecurity, a lot of women dealing with domestic violence and abuse. Everybody's like, it's a real struggle. The single mothers are one of the poorest cohorts in our society, and they're very stressed out. They're really stressed out. And I think it's just interesting because on the one hand, we really laud mothers, and socially we're like, everybody loves their mum. There's a lot of pop culture around Mother's Day, and there's a lot of gumph that we see culturally about mothers, but it's like, that to me is like the other end of like, do we actually, when it comes down to it, really value them? I don't know. Do we value what they do? Certainly not in economic terms, we don't.
And certainly I think you can see that in the worries that she has at the beginning of the book about, she's trying to meet deadlines, but she's also making sure that she is keeping her daughter at sort of the forefront of, making sure that her daughter feels that love. And I think that's a struggle that a lot of people will definitely be able to relate to. It certainly was quite quite moving reading about that, and it's just really interesting as well how Susie has this veneer of success at the beginning. It looks like she's living this great life. She's got a lovely little child. She's living in Glebe, in this beautiful house. But then, as we find out, it's it's not her house, and she's got this successful career, and then I think that's another great theme throughout the book about how what we present to the world and what our inner life actually is can be so different. And I think another great character that you really shows this is Jan. And I think we should talk a little bit more about Jan.
I love Jan.
She's my favourite character. Yeah, absolutely.
I just really loved her. I really loved her.
Just wonderful. Like, it really felt like this is an actual person you've met and just turned into a character in a book. She comes across in one way at the beginning, and then by the end, I don't think any reader would think the same way about Jan. Was her character easy to write or hard to write? Or
I love Jan, and I wanted to take, Jan, for people listening to this who haven't read the book, she's a woman in her late middle age. She's from Queensland. She's had a pretty hard life. She works as a nurse. She's got a divorce behind her and 2 kids who are kind of pretty troublesome, right? And she comes into Susie's life, and Susie's much more middle class and much more sophisticated and cosmopolitan than Jan. And I wanted to write about a person like Jan because I felt like, as I have in a passage in the book, like Jan's and, of all different cultures, power Australia, like they power communities all over this country, and they do all of the work, they do all of the emotional labour, they do, a lot of unpaid work, and nobody notices them, and nobody writes books about them, and nobody really sees them as sort of romantic characters, right, who are worth noting. So I wanted to bring all that forward, and I wanted to be like, this is a character who it sort of goes unnoticed in most of her life, and she just bursts into this other person's life, and she's like, you are going to notice me, you are going to listen to what I have to say, and I am going to get in your face. And I loved that about her. And yes, I did want that relationship between Jan and Susie to be very confrontational at first, and it had to be, but then I wanted them to come to an understanding. I do think that Jan progresses and changes, and she's always the same person, but our view of her changes. Yeah.
And it's Susie's perception that is changing and evolving throughout, which colours it so much more.
I think because Susie's a very prickly person, and she becomes a little bit, she's sort of, you have to get through that prickliness.
She loses pretensions throughout.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
There's one other aspect of the book that when I read, because I read the cover quote before, normally if I get a proof, I just start reading the book because I love to just dive in. But I happened to read the cover quote, and I was like, oh, a superb and original love story, an astoundingly good debut. And I was like, an astoundingly good debut, yep, a superb and original love story. I wasn't expecting that. But can you tell us a little bit about, I don't want to spoil anything, but about that, the love story.
Well, I do think ultimately it's a book about lots of things. I think it's about shame, it's about guilt, it's about redemption. It's about stories, like who gets to tell a story, who owns a story, how much of a story do you need to tell to get to the truth of something. All of those themes are in there. But I do think at the end of the day, it's probably a book about love. And I don't want to spoil it for readers, but I think that, well, the central relationship of the novel is the mother-daughter relationship. And it's a love story, I think. And there is something very intense and engaged about motherhood with a small child that almost replicates a romantic love, which maybe sounds odd, but there is something, the way that I would best put it is you're enthralled with each other in a way that, almost is a parallel to the early stages of romantic love. You just think this person is perfect, and they look upon you as perfect. And that is beautiful. And then, of course, it ruptures and changes and becomes much more complex and nuanced and grey, right? So that's at the other end of the spectrum. And that's a different kind of love, a much messier kind of love, a much more hurtful and damaged love, but still really valuable too.
That's a really interesting
Speaking of damage
perspective.
The book kind of kicks off with a high profile expose, right?
Yeah.
Which catalyses the death that you mentioned in that first sentence, which is on the back of the proof. I use the word catalyse because it's not like
It's not necessarily causation. You don't know.
That's the thing, and that's the tension of the book. One of the many tensions. But I'm thinking about the consequences of exposing people, and that's kind of your job, right, as a journo. Are there people, and I can only imagine, like, there's people whom are waiting to be exposed that maybe you have a hunch or you know about, but maybe like you don't have a source, or the source isn't robust enough to make that story publishable, or things land on the spike for other reasons. Is your career just peppered with that?
Yeah, you do find yourself in a position where you know things, or you know allegations about people that, you don't publish for a variety of reasons, and it's an odd position to be in. But then you sort of feel like you know something about someone, or potentially know something about someone that is deeply personal and deeply damaging to them. Yeah, that's pretty weird. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, we're having a moment in Canberra right now where a lot of men are being exposed for all sorts of allegations of sexual misconduct, and I suspect there's lots of blokes in Canberra who are cowering right now, thinking about what journalists know but can't exactly get up, or what journalists know but can't write because it's too defamatory. So it's odd. It's a position of weird power that, I mean, I've never sought that kind of power. In fact, it sometimes can be very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And you do have a sense, like, even when you know that what you're writing is very worthy and it needs to come out, and it will come out, and it must come out, but you still think, well, even if I don't have much sympathy for the subject of this, I do have sympathy for their family, or and that's why, like, the idea of disgrace in the book is, I wanted to look at the other side of that. We show up as journalists, we show up on the worst day of people's lives, and we write a story about them, maybe about the worst thing that they ever did in a moment of misjudgment, or they're exposed for something that they really wanted to keep hidden about themselves. And does that tell the whole truth of a person? Does if you're the family member of that person, do you feel as though it's justified? I mean, I was just sort of always interested in the other side of that, because it's something that I've thought a lot about in my career.
Yeah, this book certainly gets you
to think about that.
Thinking about it.
All I could think about was, like, when I finished reading the book, was just, I would like to I think I was the first person to, I think I got the proof and read it that weekend. So I was like, okay, so I need someone else to read the book so we can talk about the things that have happened in the book.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
So is that one of the things that you're hoping to get out of, having written this book, is to have people sort of have these kinds of discussions about the different, themes in the book? Yeah,
I mean, I can't say, it's funny because I wrote the book, it was such a personal thing for me, and it was like this little world that I created, where it was almost like an escape for me, because it was during quite an intense period in my life when I was writing it. So I didn't think too much like I'm trying to provoke a discussion or provoke thought or anything. The fact that people are reading it now and connecting with it emotionally is incredibly humbling and gratifying, and it feels like maybe I succeeded in whatever my mission was. But yeah, I mean, when I was writing it, I loved this world that I'd created. I wanted to spend more time with the characters. I wanted to see what they would do. So that it was sort of almost a deeply selfish act in that sense. I took time away from my daughter to do it. I neglected my duties. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate that you've done that.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm supposed to be doing it a second time for my next book. So. Yeah.
Well, that was my last question. Will you write fiction again?
Yeah, I'm writing another book. So I know what it's about. I know the themes of it, and I know who's in it. It's broadly speaking, it's going to be a book about hunger, and the world of cooking, and the world of restaurants.
Oh my God, I'm so into this already.
That is a book for you.
Yep, that's a book for me.
Yeah, but I want it to be about hunger. Yeah, the different kinds of hunger.
Amazing.
Jacqueline, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure.
And congratulations. This thing is excellent, and it's already finding a lot of readers. We're thrilled for you.
Thank you so much. It's been a really, really nice thing to talk to you guys.
if you want to get a copy of The Truth About Her, it is published by Fourth Estate and it is available right now from booktopia.com.au.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.